Welcome everyone and thank you for being with us. We at Uruk Project Management have been conducting Uruk webinar for the past months, and if you like to take a look at our previous webinar, we will put it's put in our YouTube channel, Applied Project Management Uruk by Uruk PM, and we will put the link for the YouTube channel in the chat box. Today we are pleased to have Ms. Sandra Hoskins for us for the second time. Her first webinar with us was back on May and this year, and also we have her presentation is posted in our YouTube channel. So if you like to take a look at her previous presentation, you can find it there. Sandra will be presenting today the topic of the Holmes and Watson. To tell the project's story, you need a storyteller. Our speaker, Mrs. Hoskins, is a published author. Her specialties in project management consulting, education and training, coaching, enterprise project management, portfolio and program management. Sandra believes in the benefits of the project management as a fundamental life skill and encourage the use of project management to achieve a personal and professional accomplishment. So welcome, Ms. Hoskins, and thank you again for being with us. And of course, we will take questions during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. We have a question and answer session. So without further ado, I would like to give the presentation for Mr. Hoskins, and you can start sharing, of course, and you can start your presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to hope that it is screen sharing.
Yeah, we can see your screen, yes.
So one of the trends that is happening in project management education programs today and in the C-suite is there's a preoccupation with data-driven storytelling. And part of the challenge is that storytelling is more of an art than a science. And if we think about stories that resonate with us, they're stories that were written with discovery in mind and taking us through a path that makes us remember. If we think about our teachers from school, whether it was grade school, high school, or in a university or college classroom, the ones we remember are the ones who engage us, spark a little bit of creativity, and take the opportunity to make the subject compelling. And in today's world in project management, when you talk to people about the current state of your project, they all see something different. It's like the ink spots that they used to use when we were in high school to say, "What do you see?" And every one of us would look at that set of ink spots and see something different. This is the way 99.9% of project managers communicate with their stakeholders. They make a picture, and the picture can look something like this, right? We give them stoplights, and we put it on a PowerPoint slide, and we say, it's black, it's red, it's yellow, it's green. We don't tell them the story that can enroll them in the potential to fix it. We just put it on the screen. With resource management, our demand planning for talent is pathetic. And it's not pathetic just in the realm of project management, it's pathetic in business in general. And part of that is because nobody really understands the difference between availability and capacity. They don't understand that just because it's 40 hours a week, that guess what? You've been allocated 80 hours of work in a 40-hour week. And it's because our team members are unable to craft a story that enrolls a manager to understand what that over allocation means. They report time to payroll. They don't report time to individual projects. So the ability for us to get and enroll people in an outcome is extremely hard. Columns and rows aren't enough anymore. I've spent the last 5 months trolling through 1 million records for a customer. And out of that 1 million records in the database, they ended up having only 3,000 valued customers. And there's a story that you have to tell to get people to understand. But in order to do that, you have to understand where people come from a learning perspective. Because the way that I communicate is going to be different from the way Munir communicates, Nada communicates, Bill communicates. Every one of us is doing something different. And part of that goes back to understanding that storytelling has to hit all 4 of the learning styles and outcomes. And if you look at that picture, and you can put this in the chat, what do you see when you look at that picture? Do you see horses?
And the face.
Okay, you see the face. So the face tells me that you are probably right-brained, which means you're visual and tactile, learn by doing. If you see the horses first and don't see the face, you're probably left-brained. So the learning styles that go with this are, if you're left-brained, you're auditory. And that means me talking to you when I tell you a story requires me to have emotion in my tone. I have to vary my delivery and use words that resonate in the ear. Most people who tell a story put up a PowerPoint slide that looks like they just put absolutely everything on a screen. They've copied a paragraph out of a book, put it on their PowerPoint deck, and that's the story. And then they read it to you in a monotone voice, and like that, you're asleep. Right? Right-brained people are visual. So what that means is the story needs to paint a picture for someone. They need to be able to follow it almost like a digital camera. You have to make it real. You have to get them to understand a flow that they can map out in their head. The other right brain communication point and learning style is tactile. Now, tactile people are the most difficult to enroll in a story because they have to feel it. It has to, by some degree, be internalized for them, so they either feel comfortable with the story, they feel frustrated for the story, or they're mad. Right? There's a visceral response for people who are tactile. The 4th learning style is probably the most difficult. And the reason that I say it's the most difficult is because it's the people who are the recorders in our life. The people who make notes and tend to sometimes become a little bit more distracted if the story isn't something that they can make a note or make a pause. So when you think about really great storytellers, one of the best storytellers was Arthur Conan Doyle. Another really great storyteller was Vince Flynn. Another great storyteller and could paint an amazing picture was Tom Clancy. Think about the stories as you read those stories. And when you got to the end of the book, you looked up and you read those books without stopping. You didn't want to put them down. So when we're trying to communicate from a project perspective, we need to get to first and foremost what is real. And the challenge we have with reality is that most project managers don't want to know about reality, and a lot of time our stakeholders don't want reality. It's that question that you ask is, what do you want to hear? And a project manager and the team will sometimes give you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. And that's because they want it to be quick. They almost want that conversation to be a drive-by. So when they do that, what they give us is a whole lot of data. And sometimes very poorly articulated data. What's the story, do you think, behind not updating the schedule? For most people, the reason that they don't update the schedule, the story is, I didn't have time. Well, what does didn't have time mean? Is it you didn't have time because you have too many projects on your plate? Is it that you didn't have time because you were on vacation? Or does it have to do with a triggered risk event, a massive change? Why didn't you have time? Give me the backstory behind that so that I can understand what the possibilities are. So we have collateral for every project that any one of us has ever worked on. The first project you worked on, really well maintained. The second one, not so well. The third one, not so well. The fourth one, not at all. So we're trying to craft from bad data. And if our data is suspect, the charts and graphs we create, which are in the information bucket, don't mean anything. They really don't. So we're not able to take the knowledge, skills, and wisdom that people bring to the table and transform that information in a way that it is useful. We need to be able to create a narrative. And planning a narrative is reasonably simple. It's taking a look at the data, and if it's suspect, say so, craft the reason. So let me give you an example for a narrative. I was asked to audit a project, and the schedule was 3 years out of date. What that means is it hadn't been updated for 3 years. I couldn't walk in to the president's office and say, you didn't keep this project schedule up to date, that's why you're late. And when we restart this project, we're going to have to push it out 3 years, because that means nothing, right? That doesn't even provide anywhere even close to the solution. So the team and I sat down and we crafted a narrative for the president of the company. And it started with the current state. We were restarting a project that had been tabled. So we talked about the conditions that said, this is why the project is getting picked up again. The customer has come back. We've signed a contract. We're now going to work with the customer to bring this forward. Here's the things that we need to do immediately to ensure that we can deliver by the target date. And we listed them off, talked about what the steps were that we had to do. And then the VP understood, the president understood that, yes, the dates in the schedule were going to change, but it was not because somebody didn't keep it up to date. It's because we had tabled a project at the request of the customer. So bringing the narrative to the table using language that makes sense to the people participating, because we needed a decision from him. So the narrative of restarting the project, and here are the things that we need to approach and do. And then it's going to cost us more money because it was tabled for 3 years. So we talked to what the change was in supply chain. We talked about change in cost, potential change to the product. But that story made the team comfortable, and crafting it got a whole bunch of angst out of the room, because we talked about it from a, what do we tell people? How do we communicate the 5 W's? And focused on what the message needed to be. We focused on what does done look like. Taking that opportunity to not just drag out this schedule and sit it in front of somebody and say, see, this is what it was, this is what it is. Bringing it back to, here's what we need to do, here's why we need to do it, and this is the decision we need from you. So we need to follow the path of storytelling, because that narrative is something that is used today at Amazon. That is one of the biggest ways that they share information, is not with a PowerPoint slide, but with a narrative. It's foundationally changed their time to market for many things. It's also important to pick a detective. And tongue in cheek, the reason that we pick a detective is I was doing a session in Texas at Texas A&M. And we were talking about project forensics and how important it was to have all of our collateral current. And there's always one of those people in the back of your class that has a gold star for being the class clown. There is always one of those. And he's sitting in the back of the room. He's got his feet up on the desk, and he's going to give me a little bit of grief. And you can kind of tell, because they get, the body language gets a little fidgety, and they get this smirk on their face, and you just know that whatever is coming is going to be entertaining as all get out. And he said to me, well, what you're really talking about, Sandra, is bagging the evidence. So what that says to me is I'm a detective. And I went, yeah, that's true to some degree. Those skills that we need that are so important are what hook people on detective shows like Law and Order and CSI and Shetland and Hinterland, all those really well-crafted stories. So I said to him, so who would be your best example of a great detective team? And like this, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And I said, okay, so let's take this to a new place. What is it that you as a project manager get from Sherlock Holmes? And he said, well, he's a dominant personality, and I kind of like that. So he's not easily put in a corner. He has determination. He is analytical. He is an observer, a synthesizer, but he's also a skeptic. He looks at things with a different eye than most people do. And he gave me the quote that is in red at the top. And the most important part of that quote isn't the whole thing, but actually the last sentence. And he says, I have frequently gained my first real insight into the character of parents by studying their children. And you think about that, how many of us judge a parent and don't go back to see whether or not they raised really terrific children. So going back to being a master, but the problem with Holmes is, if you read the stories, he was a drug addict. So he couldn't do this alone. And truth be told, none of us do project management work alone. We all have a team. So what we need to do is, if you're really analytical, for goodness sakes, find somebody who's a people person to be on the other side of that. He was very, very methodical. Maybe a little bit pedantic. You know, he was one of those people that you kind of go, you know, if I could just give you a smack on the back of your head, I would feel better and you'd get a wake-up call. So as we match our skills, we need to take it to the next place. Every one of us needs either a Holmes or a Watson. And Watson was very different in his role because he was from the military. He had served in India. He was a medical doctor, so he was a different kind of smarts than Holmes. Holmes is the detail-oriented, down in the weeds human being. Dr. Watson is the storyteller. His purpose was to be the chronicler, the person who recorded the story. His purpose was to be the note taker. And we don't have note takers. You know, I don't remember the last time any one of us have ever had someone sitting in a meeting with us taking notes. A lot of our customers have gone to recording meetings, all the voice, so that they can go back and put it through things like Otter.ai. But that doesn't give you the context behind the story. So when we look at Watson, he takes notes. He's the narrator. He's the one that explains what happens. And for project managers, and I would say any manager, part of our role is to make sure that we level set context and understanding. And more increasingly today, context and understanding has become so foundationally important, because COVID changed things. For the tactile people in our groups and on our teams, they drew their energy from working with people in the same place. They don't necessarily get the same energy from an online forum. And so if you don't find a way to introduce emotion and narration, it's extremely difficult. In education, one of the biggest challenges they have is getting children to absorb curriculum without it being memorization. So that the folks who are tactile, the children that are tactile, they always do better in grades K through 8. They go to high school, they struggle. And that's because it's a shift from tactile and visual learning to auditory and recording learning. So we need to always balance that need. And so if you're channeling Holmes and you're detail oriented, and I can tell you, I love detail. So I am so left brain, it hurts. So my need to have all of those million rows of data so that I know where we're going, that helps me. It doesn't help my customer, right? I could print out the spreadsheet. It would be like, I estimated it would probably take 11 trees to print out all those rows and give it to them. It's like, what's the point? So there is a process that we call, the laughingly in our organization, we call it the detective cycle. And we got together as a group, and for 6 months, what we did was we read detective stories. And the reason we did that is we were looking for techniques that were described, the way people were engaged. Did the story keep us going? And one of the things that we realized fairly quickly is that in every one of those detective books, those stories, there's a trigger event. And it's well described if it keeps you riveted to the page. I laughingly tell my students a story about losing a bulldozer for Risk. I tell them a story about cutting the bottom off a lake. And that engages them in that something could go wrong. So the story for cutting the bottom off a lake starts with a mining company in northern Canada drilling a new mine. So they've sunk the shaft, which is essentially like an elevator shaft, and two things go up and down that shaft. One is a skip, and the skip is used to bring ore out, and the other is the cage, and that's used to take people down to the bottom of the mine. And off that shaft is, they're called raises, but they're like floors in an apartment building. And they mapped them out. And they had to run one of these raises, AKA floors, out underneath a lake. They brought the heavy equipment down and started to drill. And I know this because the person who was operating the equipment is somebody I went to school with. And all of a sudden, water is coming into the mine. And it starts as a trickle, and then it picks up speed. And now you have my friend from high school understanding intuitively that he needs to book it. He needs to be out of that place, because if he isn't quickly, he's going down to the bottom of that 1,200-foot shaft. So he comes up, and this lake is very slowly draining into the mine. They can actually stand and watch this happen. And I said to him, well, how did you do that? And he said, well, we actually stopped about 20 feet higher than we should have. I didn't check to make sure we were in the right place. And I started up the longboard drill, and the next thing I knew, water was coming in. For the last 15 years, the solution was to put a pump in the bottom of the mine shaft. They pump the water out, and it drains back in every night. You need to make this trigger event real for someone. You need to make the potential solutions real for someone. Because just saying, well, I cut the hole up, the bottom of a lake, what does that tell anybody? It really doesn't. It states this is what happened, but it doesn't tell them why. It doesn't tell them where to go to get that extra information. What's your observations? What can you see, hear, smell, experience? Can you define the 5 W's? In this case, what happened? Why did it happen? Where did it happen? What is the potential solution? We need to get that crafted so that people pay attention. Now, they will never do that again. And on my list of potential risks is making sure that you measure twice, cut once, in theory. But what do you observe about why that happened? What do you observe about the circumstances? And we need to listen with more than our ears. We need to observe with our eyes. We need to pay attention to the experience of the people who are tactile. so that when we craft our story and we apply reasoning, we can get that analytical compound. Most project managers analyze the schedule from an incomplete space. If senior executives in an organization allowed accounting to manage the books the way most people manage schedules, they would be in an orange jumpsuit in a federal prison somewhere, because it's against the law. So we need that observation. So when we do audits, schedule audits, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, what do we see? We're looking for, what does it tell us? We're looking for clues. Observation is about picking up clues, picking up facts, picking up current state, and then analyzing it to say, well, what is the message that we're getting? Because analysis is really a form of messaging from a story perspective. What is it that I can do in form of an assessment? Because when I go to the assessment, I need to be willing to put this in writing. We need to bag the evidence. We need to preserve the chain of evidence. One of the challenges most people have in scheduling in particular is they don't keep historical copies. They never have the ability to do a point in time snapshot, and they blame it on the tool. Well, the tool is the synthesizer, it's not the messenger. And so in order for us to be able to craft the narrative, we need to have the evidence to back up what we want to do. You can't interpret it and come up with a message if you haven't done the first four. What does the evidence tell us? What is the go forward position for the team? Why is it important for us to get to that point? Because the challenge really becomes is we can't draw conclusions from incomplete data. Lots of people do, but the conclusions are suspect. And that's one of the reasons why, when you think about the way that Uruk is planning their project management platform, it's based on us being able to bag the evidence so that we can interpret it, so that we can draw conclusions, and that the conclusions will be based on benefit and value added. Because most organizations don't have that. And they don't stay with a tool long enough to collect the data in one spot. Right? That's one of the reasons why the biggest tool in project management is Excel. Not a scheduling tool, not a tracking tool, not even document management. None of those things are in a single spot so that we can create conclusions that we can use to build a narrative. Because we need to communicate the narrative. And then if we've done it well, we can get a decision. But thinking about when you tell your story is taking us back to a couple of basic things that we learned in grade school. And the very first one is, when you tell the story, what is the solution that you're communicating? You should probably never have, when you're telling a story, more than 3 options. Because if there's more than 3 options, somebody's going to tune out. And your first option must always be to do nothing. Because that gets people's attention. We need to talk about the pros and cons of not doing anything. Because that message and that part of the narrative or the story is what gets people's attention. And then you get this visceral response that says, well, we have to do something. We can't leave this sit. So first and second choice. First is do nothing. Second best option. There was a study done in the mid 80s, and I have to look it up and see if it's still available. And they looked at projects and why projects were in trouble. And 85% of the time, the option that was selected by a senior executive was the one in third place. And no one knows why. And they think it's because when people read the documents that we produce, they pay the most direct attention to the first one and then build their defense as they go through the next options. So out of curiosity, we decided to experiment with this. And Sandra's experimentation turned into experimenting on my family. And every time I wanted something, I would put what I want in third place. And 85% of the time I get what I want. And the best part of it all is that my husband knows I do it. And he falls for it every time, right? The story. Then what's the recommendation? So we've got our choices. Now we give them the recommendation. What's the benefit? What's the value? What's the strategy? And we craft it so that every one of these stories that we take forward has a flow to it in terms of presentation. That's what really good authors do, is they craft it so that as you go through the story, it's going to enroll someone in the message you want them to accept or the decision that you need them to make. So really starting with the recommendation. And then if you have a recommendation and you're talking about the benefit and the value, the other thing you need to do is talk about what could go wrong. I read a lot of documents that say this is what we should do. They never talk about what you won't do. They never talk about what could go wrong. They never talk about what possible change could happen. We need to have both sides, the plus and the minus, because what it really means is we need to have clarity of position before we can tell a story. Then we need to make it real for everyone in the room. One of the things that I tell my team every day, and when they first join, they're a little uncomfortable because I tell them yesterday doesn't matter at all, except for the lesson. And when we craft our story, we have to accept that there are going to be people who are part of our world for whom yesterday is more important than today. So when we craft our story, what we really want to be able to do is ensure that they understand that we have captured their lessons, that what they bring to the table is important. Because every day, every one of us learns something new. And there's a lesson in the newness. But then at midnight tonight, it's history. In fact, probably if you wanted to get somebody's attention, you can say, you only have the 60 seconds you're in. That's all. And 20% of any project, anytime, is relevant today. It doesn't matter whether you have a to-do list with 500 things on it or 85,000. It really doesn't matter. It's what do I need to do in this time slice? And so when we craft the narrative for team members in particular, we talk to not the end date of the project, because that's too far for some. We talk to what do people need to do in the next week? And we ask 3 questions. Craft for me a story. What did you complete? What were your challenges? What's in progress? And if it's in progress or in flight, as they like to say now, what about any challenges you're having? Do you need any help? And then do you know what you're supposed to start next? Because that's the story at the team level. But if we don't craft that story at a team level, we don't have the data that we need to be able to craft the story for the executive suite. And what keeps the C-suite up at night is not whether or not you were 4 hours over your estimate. It's whether or not you were a week late, or your supplier is not going to be able to get something to you for 6 months. You need to go back and give them the reality behind the 6-month delay. And not just saying, well, I can't do anything about it. You have to have a more detailed narrative. It's also important to always know what tomorrow might bring. Encouraging your team to look at their personal to-do list and what are they responsible for tomorrow morning? What's the story if they're going to be delayed? But thinking about what that forecast truly looks like, because that's part of the story for every project. What is our 10, 15, 20-day roll? What is our 30, 60, 90-day forecast? So that we're bringing everyone in to the same place. And last but not least, ignorance is not bliss. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get people to tell you how much time they really spent on something. Because they tell you what you want to hear. They don't necessarily tell you what you need to hear, because they don't have a story to back it up. They don't have the communication channel that allows them to take that forward. So in wrap up, what's important about storytelling and project management or management of a business is that the audience that you're talking to is going to drive the type of story that you tell. But if you don't have a good process in place, it's going to be detrimental. And people have to have permission to give you the bad news first. But they need to be able to back up that bad news with a situational discussion about the reality of what happened. And storytelling is something that is not necessarily intuitive to everyone. I mean, I learned storytelling from my teachers, from my mentors, from being the only woman in a military unit, because you have to make the information real. And if you can make it real and give them context, you will find that your projects go an awful lot better. Q&A. Any questions?
So we're open to questions. Anybody have
or comments?
I don't know if I have any question, but comment-wise, storytelling, I think we are facing this everywhere we go. And right now, as I start to work toward fundraising, that's the biggest nightmare, is that in pitching, is that how do we present our story?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest things I am struggling with right now. Especially when you're dealing with different investors with different background and that might not understand project management, is that how do we tell the story of why Uruk?
I think you tell the story of why Uruk, starting from the ability to make informed decisions. That's what, in the end, that's what we get. We have a process that collects our collateral and our artifacts. It allows us to produce stories, documents, charts that pull that together. But the end result is Uruk is a platform that helps make good business decisions. It provides the framework for decision making. That's the story. If you're talking to people in the C-suite, it's about what kind of decisions can they make?
Okay.
What will the data give them? If you're talking to people in the PMO, the story's a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely.
Because
That's a
it's about
challenge.
consistent application.
Yeah.
I'm happy to help you craft it.
I'm the next few days I will be working on revisiting the pitch. I'll share for input.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's when I'm talking to people, that's what I communicate. It's all about the decision, the good business decisions that I can make in the end.
But
That's
we
why.
want the decision, right? Because the ability is we want to make the right decision and execute them.
Yeah. But the decision comes before execution.
Correct. Correct. Interesting. Okay.
Okay. So Bill, thoughts?
Hey, Sandra, this is Naved. I had a more general question. I like your approach towards explaining the communication, the things. One of the things that I'm trying to promote is that an organization cannot go on a project management journey unless they train or create the culture. So yes, you're communicating clearly and things of that nature. But if the other side is not very well versed on all of these things, it's kind of like losing your audience. So what do you have to say about when you are educating the executives and those people? I mean, are you promoting that they need to do more like a organizational level project, knowledge assessment, knowledge distribution, those kind of things?
Yes, because I'm one of the people who always gets in trouble because I don't think the PMO belongs in IT. If you're a manufacturing organization, your PMO should be an operational part of the business, and you should be looking at the entire portfolio. The difficulty is that for most organizations, the PMO is not an organizational entity. It is tool-based, process-driven. And for executives, you want them to understand that their portfolio of projects is broader than any one department in their business. We have a customer right now that has 18 PMOs.
Wow.
And they're all in the same building.
Hmm.
And they're all incompetent.
And they all recommend different tools, right? So they all do something different. So project management has to be, in my opinion, and my humble opinion, an organizational requirement like quality.
Yeah.
We need to bring it forward from the same perspective. You don't have different quality departments as a rule. You might have different quality streams, but they come under one big umbrella.
Mhm.
I think that's why project management is so difficult, because when you talk to an executive, they're seeing all of the different things that are happening, and they don't have one single focal point anymore.
Mhm.
And when we do training, one of the strategies that we started with training is that we want them to do, in effect, a capstone, so that the training is not 2 days in a classroom, which would be the most common approach. You train them, and then they go away and promptly forget everything they learned. And they don't apply any of it because they go back to work and they don't have the necessary support to move forward. And probably in the last 20 years, we've had 3 organizations that have supported people going forward with changing the culture of the organization and the way that they work. And people in many companies need permission to do that. So it makes it much more difficult. But it's all in the end about decisions. And in order to make decisions, you need to collect and reflect on the data that you get.
Thank
And
you.
mentoring is, and one of the things we coach a lot of our companies to do is to either assign a mentor or a coach to work with these people as they're learning, so that they're not
Mhm.
left out there. Basically, here's Smartsheet, go away and figure out how it works. Right, that they're not left without any support at all.
Mm.
But I'll take a sidebar with you anytime if you want to have a chat.
Yeah, will do. Thank you. Thank you much.
So Bill, are you in the Sahara again?
No, it's just one of the earliest shots I took in Dubai. We took a sand tour in Dubai. And
Cool.
I always kind of enjoy it.
So any feedback?
I'm a big fan of storytelling. I've been teaching it in my leadership and teams course for more than 20 years now. You've probably got more structure to it than what I do, because you're specifically targeting stakeholders, whereas I'm teaching it as more of a team building tool and getting people to understand the lesson, that you understand the lessons about how to behave and what's going on and so on. So I'm a little bit more maybe a lot more open, maybe less structured than this, but basically I like it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely storytelling. I know project management training, I usually do a lot of it, but I love the model because you have it when you start, especially with the concept of the detective model, right? How do you go through that circles and that model? It is definitely well structured. I'm gonna review that again and use that concept, especially I think as you in your area of work when you do forensic project management and troubleshooting. I think that's really very important to have that kind of mindset and structure to it. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Any
And
feedback?
You.
And I also noticed one thing when somebody doing the storytelling, when they're sharing the story and talking to the stakeholder, usually I thought it's like more about a person saying the story from the start to the end. I like the way that you presented that it's more interactive, like it's not something that I'm telling the story. I want you to hear it to the end, and then you give me your opinion. It's more into interaction from the beginning, when the first part that there's nothing for you to do, but the second part when it comes that now I'm sharing this information, I'm now start to get your attention and try to get more of your input, your ideas. Where are you now in my story? I like this kind of interaction. It's like more active, it's not something just listen to the end and then we'll talk about what's the outcome of that.
Yeah, storytelling, and I think Bill would probably agree with me, is an iterative process. As you gain more knowledge, skills, experience, and wisdom, you update the story. And because projects are a path, every day is an opportunity to keep the story updated. Because nothing remains the same, unfortunately. Okay.
All right.
Well, great. Thank you, Sandra. It was really informative, and I hope everybody finds it a benefit. It's something we learned about today. Again, thank you. And of course, I would like to remind everybody that this presentation was recorded, and we will post this on our YouTube channel. Also, we will have it on LinkedIn page. So we have other presentation also in our YouTube channel. So I hope if anybody wants interest to look at anything or attend or miss any of our webinars, you're welcome to go back and look at it. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. And thank you, Sandra, again.
Okay. And I will send my slide deck in a PDF. So if you want to attach it to LinkedIn, you can.
Yes, definitely. If I get any request, I will definitely do that. Thank you.
Have an amazing
Sandra.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Last minute? Last message, Sandra? Or anyone else?
storytelling is about practicing.
All right, I'm gonna have a chance to practice very soon on my pitch. So, all
Yeah, it is. It's full-fledged practice. You
right.
get better at it with practice.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Sandra.
you.